Well, greetings, everyone. It is good to see you all here on this Wednesday morning near noon. I am Jeff Rainwater. I am the Superintendent of Congregational and Community Vitality for the Mountain Sky Conference, and I welcome you to another vital conversation today as we talk about MissionInsite Inspiration, a wonderful tool. And we're going to welcome today as our guest presenter Reverend Tiffany Keith, who is a pastor who wears many hats and has wore many hats throughout the time. She is now the associate pastor at First United Methodist Church of Colorado Springs. She is also the planting pastor for The Edge, a new faith community started in our conference. She has served as congregational resource minister for the Pikes Peak district, where she racked up hundreds and hundreds of MissionInsite logins, which is why I invited her here today. And most recently, she is the lead preacher at Cowboy Church, a new worship service of First United Methodist Church of Colorado Springs. And she's going to talk to us today about how to use MissionInsite and how to use that data to help set priorities, learn about your community, and more. So Tiffany, welcome to Vital Conversations. It's so good to have you here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is exciting. This is fun stuff. Although I did not realize hundreds and hundreds of logins. Huh?
Hundreds and hundreds, yes.
Who knew? I did not know. So I love MissionInsite. I love the things, the questions that can help us answer and the ways that can help us see our communities. And I know it's a rabbit hole. It is, once you get in there, there's more information than you can ever consume. So my hope is that I can walk us down one path that is clear and helpful rather than trying to tell you all that it does. And what that means is other people, if you work with them in MissionInsite, they may actually bring you down different paths. And that's okay because there's so much you can do with this. One of the things that I've kind of decided to do is there's a document. I'm posting a link to it in the chat right now. And then here momentarily, I will share it with you. And it's going to sort of give you a little bit of, show you where I am and what I'm doing. MissionInsite this is the location of the folder with the files I'm going to share today, because there are files that I'm going to share. If you're watching later and don't have access to the chat, you can go to this bit.ly link right here, which is bit.ly-m, capital M, TN, capital S, KY, capital M, capital I. And this is the place that you'll find instructions along with there's a couple of files that I'll use today. My introduction into MissionInsite was church planting. I was planting The Edge out of First Colorado Springs, and I needed to figure out who I was planting a church for because we were looking at the people that live and work in downtown Colorado Springs, and my question was, who are they? So let's kind of get started. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to say about this file, it is a Google Doc. So you are welcome to, if you take notes in there, you can ask questions in there. I will go back into this document afterwards and see if there's anything for me to answer. You can add comments. And don't worry about it being clean or pretty or organized. You can just drop stuff in there. And that way people that come back later and see this document can kind of see the notes that you all took too. Okay, so let's sort of dig into MissionInsite. I want to make sure that everybody can see this screen, okay? So give me a thumbs up. Jeff, can you see my, okay. So this is the client login screen. And
oh, no.
No?
Can't see the login screen. We still see the Google Doc you shared.
Okay. How do I transition? So never mind, I got it. No?
Probably have to, there you go, that's it.
Okay, so in the Google Doc, in the folder of that link, there is instructions on how for you to create a new account on MissionInsite. I've already created one, so I'm not going to do that. The instructions are there. I think they're current and will work for you. And you follow those instructions. Let us know if you need help getting on, and we can help you start your own account for your church. I am going to go ahead and log in under me. And just a short comment on this. I am not going to slow down for you all to be able to write down step by step. Instead, my expectations on this call is that since it's being recorded, you can go back and look to see what I did and repeat my clicks at a later time when you're ready. So I will go slow and clear, but I'm not going to go slow enough for you to write it down. So I'm going to click the next generation people view once I get in. And this is going to be MissionInsite. I don't believe you all have this screen. I think I have it just because I'm an admin on it. So I see more than you will. I think when you get in, it'll take you directly to your church that you have set up. And okay, here's what we're looking at. We are looking at, let me get rid of this really quick. Here is the mountain sky, if it catches up to me. So here's all the churches in our conference. And if you're here looking at our conference and all of these churches, it's not helpful for you to know, how Lander UMC, their neighborhood is, if you're in Trinidad. So the whole question that we're starting to dig into is, who are your people? Out of the entire conference, out of all of these people, out of all of these churches, which ones are yours? And what are they like? How do we define them? What are the, where are they on, politics and religion and history and age and family and kids? So the first section of this today is just really going to be digging down into finding out who your people are for your church. There is another, hold on, let me do a couple of clicks here really quick. I am going to work first with RIN, United Methodist Church. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I have their membership database, and I can install it really quick. And I'm going to show you how to do this, how to install it. So we go to, let me see, I'm going to go to plotting, and I think it does this. So you're going to plot your people, and it's going to say, you have no people in here. But I want to see where RIN's members live and work. So I'm going to select a study. I'm going to do RIN. I'm going to add their congregation because it's the only option I have. And then I'm going to click next.
Tiffany?
Yes, sir.
I haven't ever done this, but I've used it. Can you explain why this is important to do this now instead of just using the data set as it is?
Okay, so it's important because the entire conference is big, and we can get down in our neighborhood and see our neighbors. But the question I'm first asking is, who are those people? You can get down into your neighborhood and just start there. And I think I began on that path, and it's a good path to take. It'll give you all sorts of information. I was also working with a church that didn't exist yet. So my question was, who are the neighbors? My first question that I'm asking today is, who's in your church? Because who they are and where they live is going to answer my second question, which is, are you a neighborhood church, or are you a cathedral church? And I'll explain that in a second. Is that helpful in answering your question?
Thank you.
Okay. So yes, you can skip uploading people. I think it made a world of difference for me, and I've heard from I was told, actually, because I started without uploading people, and I was told by other churches that uploading their people was the most helpful thing they did. So I started doing that, and I am, and working with churches, found that much, much more helpful. So MissionInsite people upload. This one right here, I skipped this file. This is really deep into the data. This is another whole rabbit hole that you can go down, and I never have. So I always just hit next on this page. Now, finally, so I don't really like how they have this done. Finally, when you're on this page, you can click here to download the template for congregants. The other place to get that is you can do that in the folder I sent you on the Google Drive, and there's an Excel file. You can download that one. And to be honest with you, I probably would download that one because I made a couple of changes that are helpful. And then I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop share just briefly because I'm going to open up what those look like. And so you can see, I'm not going to totally walk you through it. The other thing, okay, a rabbit hole. There's so much information. I deleted the first names of the congregation members from the RIN database, the first and last names, just for privacy. But if you get into a database, they downloaded this from their database, and they have, client ID, first name, last name, address, all of the information. You can leave them all blank except for address, city, state, and zip code. You can, almost every single church management database, you can go in there and just download it as a CSV, or you can manipulate it from Word. Filling in your congregation there. And then I am going to go back to MissionInsite because I already did this for RIN. I am going to download it. I spent a lot of time making sure it was very clean and ready. And I'm going to upload it. It will give you any errors here. So there's 250 people I'm uploading, and I have no blank addresses, no blank cities, no blank states, zip codes, and I'm going to upload it. And then I'm going to save into the system. The thing you need to know about this is it actually takes a little while to upload. So do it one day and expect to actually look at your data a few hours later, because the computer right now is working in the background. Okay, after that is done, I am going to actually skip you all to First Colorado Springs. So this is where I started with my MissionInsite stuff. And I need to get rid of this. Once you have your people in, you can click this button down here that's plotting. Sometimes it looks like this. So open the people plot, open congregants, click all, and click plot. And if it's ready, they will all show up. So this for me is when I start digging into the question of who are our neighbors. When I look at First Colorado Springs, so the neighborhood, the 80% of our congregation is the entire city. And if you start thinking through where are we going to put our resources, who is our neighbor, who are we going to help? The city of Colorado Springs feels too big, too many different kinds of people and too many different places. I can't do much with this information because it's just not clear enough for us. The story, like there's some stories that are helpful though. So when I was starting The Edge, I knew that I was starting The Edge in downtown. So I actually drew my neighborhood just around here and said, here's where The Edge is going to meet the needs of the people. Another thing First Colorado Springs did a few years ago is we, kind of narrowed it down into Urban Peak, which is now called The Place, and decided to do a big campaign and give them, kind of donate a lot to them. We raised over $200,000 and gave it to The Place. And we did this because, trying to $200,000 in the city of Colorado Springs, it is not going to go far, but we focused down on this one tiny neighborhood, this one tiny organization, and it helped us focus. It helped us figure out, where our resources are best spent. So I'm gonna kind of, that's big and I know it can be kind of confusing. So I'm gonna actually take it down a level and move to a different church. Another church that I worked with that I loved working with them was St. Paul's. So St. Paul's is in a neighborhood of Colorado Springs. It's in a neighborhood here in town. And when we plotted out theirs, so I'm going to do this again. I'm going to put their membership on the map so we can see where every single one of their members live. They had the same thing as Colorado Springs. Although in worship, or as First Church, so in worship they have a lot fewer people. But when you look at where they live all over Colorado Springs. And this became a struggle for us because, they're in this spot between, are they a neighborhood church? Is who they are a church that digs deeply into their neighborhood and supports their neighborhood? Or are they a church more like First in Colorado Springs, where they have a lot of communities and they're helping communities that are in neighborhoods? It's kind of like a layer up or a layer down. So when St. Paul's looked at their data and their people, our first question we had to ask really was, who is their neighbor? Because they don't have a really strong, a strong like place where all of their people live. And so they struggled through this. Like our question was, who is your neighbor? And we started digging into actually church size theory. So what we figured out with them is they're on this line between, they used to be more of that cathedral model church that really supported the other smaller communities, or a smaller family church where they're more of a family and they have their neighborhood that they want to work with. And they had to make that choice because they're kind of made this decline through the years. So who they used to be and who they are now has really shifted. So one example I pull from them, there was just a wow moment for us, is we pulled their data, their membership, and they did decide, we understand that we live across the city, but we want to be a church in our neighborhood. So tell us who our neighbors are. And they've been spending time and resources on, trying to restart and grow their children and youth program. And they have an amazing VBS. So they do VBS in the summers and a lot of kids come. But during the year, they didn't necessarily have a really strong full kids program. So when we pulled their demographics of the St. Paul's neighborhood, what we saw was there's almost no kids that actually live in their neighborhood. So if they want to be a neighborhood church and reach out to their neighborhood, trying to build relationships with kids wasn't going to work for them. And that's why they continued to struggle with getting kids to come to church week after week. but who was in their neighborhood are baby boomers nearing retiring age and a little bit older. So, which answered the question why they had really strong VBSs in the summer. It's because their grandparents had kids, right? Had their grandkids with them in the summer or signed them up for VBS in the summer. So what that allowed us to do is move their resources from this kind of blanket citywide, where do we put them to, into grandkids versus kids, and allow them to, what do you market? You say, hey, if you want a safe place to bring your grandkids this summer while they're visiting, we have VBS and we would love to have your kids here. So that allowed us on there to shift where their resources were going and how they talked about being in their neighborhood. Okay, so the next one I'm gonna plot is actually Good Shepherd.
Hey, Miss Tiffany,
Yes, ma'am.
while you are bringing up the next one, so how did you find out that the demographics were the baby boomers? I mean,
So-
yeah.
I have no, so, okay, so I'm gonna walk us through the Good Shepherd one.
Okay.
Of who they are. And part of me not doing that is simply that it's just a rabbit hole. Once I pull one set of data, there is so much there that I could go through it for a long time. So we're just gonna, I'm gonna pull up the Good Shepherd one and we'll walk way more in detail around that.
So does that mean that this database that we're looking at Insight has already data in it? I mean, okay.
So MissionInsite has an unbelievable, huge database of demographic information. And in fact, Brian Lee, who my assumption is, Jeff, Brian Lee is one of the other ones that had hundreds of logins. You know, Brian Lee and I have talked, and he shows how scary it is, how much information companies have on us. So I don't have access to this, but he does. He can go down to a house and tell you how old you are, what the family is, how much money you make. And like he can draw a picture of a family in almost any house based on, I think most of the information comes from Experian. So there's just a huge amount of data. That's why it's a rabbit hole.
Thank you. I didn't get that part, so that makes perfect sense.
I'm sorry. I should have gone there a little bit more, but yeah, so we're going to dig down into that with Good Shepherd. Okay. So this is the last time I'm going to plot some data. So another church that I worked with was Good Shepherd. I spent a lot of time talking to them, hearing their story, finding out what was going on, what was working, what's not working, what their history was, why they're here, what they're doing here, and what are their strengths? What do they love? Like they loved their children's ministry, but they didn't really have any children's ministry left to speak of anymore. They are an innovative congregation, so they're willing to try new things even if they're not successful. They had this. I love this story from them. They did a trunk or treat in October, of course, one year. And they did door flyers, I think, maybe a postcard. And they had like 250, 300 kids show up, people show up. And I know I've seen churches that have, put tons of time and resources and not had 250 people show up. And there's just this beautiful moment where they brought something to the neighborhood that the neighborhood just totally grasped onto. So we had heard that story. I'd heard the stories of this congregation. So let's go ahead. How do I make that go away? and plot their people. So, and the question again is, who is their neighbors? Who are they working with? Who do they want to learn about? Who do they want to meet the needs of? Who do they want to build a relationship with? And when I plotted them, they are so clearly a neighborhood church. Who they are is they are a church that is meeting 80% of their membership is right in here. So we know that who they are in their church is matching their direct geographic neighbors. And then, so what we do at this point, and this, I'm sorry, I'm not sure who was talking earlier, but figuring out who lives in this neighborhood is, for me, starts with this button down here. No, not this one, shapes. So we're gonna draw a shape. We are gonna draw like around 80% of the neighborhood. And we wanna do this because this, when I showed the very beginning where it's the whole conference, drawing a shape tells the computer, no, these are the people that we want to know about. These are the people that we want to learn who they are. So there's so many ways when you get into your church, you can do this. You don't have to plot the people first. I will say it's very helpful plotting the people first, but you don't have to. So you can draw a simple diagram around the neighborhood if you want. And this would pull the people, the demographic people that live here. You can clear that out. You can, if you want, if you don't want to be as specific, you can draw a rectangle. You can draw a circle. You can do this polyline thing, which I don't use. And then I think you can just draw a freehand too. So you just draw that.
Have you used like a 3 mile radius?
I actually have no idea. Let me see.
That's
yeah.
okay. I used it once before.
Yeah, so it's doing that. So if you, I don't know how fast it is for you, but that's about 4 miles. If you can see it. I don't use this, but you can. And then, okay. So this one's super fun, and I'm hoping that my computer doesn't crash on it because it does take a little bit of computer bandwidth. Starting location. So you can start from the point you select on your map, which is your church, hit next, and you can do like an 8-minute drive from the church, and then hit draw. And the computer draws everything it takes 8 minutes to get from your church, an 8-minute drive. Now, this clearly for us didn't work because it didn't pull in these neighbors, but it pulled in these, which these neighbors we're not really working with, but these we really want to. So I sat down with Terry Lynn, was the pastor at the time, and I asked her, like, we really said, what do you think, who do you think your people are more specifically? And, you know, she knew kind of where people were driving from and what they were doing and why they were doing it. So she sat down with me. I'm going to show only my maps, and I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to back up just a second so you can see this. So if I draw the polygram, whatever the shape here, there is a place, current shapes. Oh, stop. To save it. You will want to save it. So once you get it on there, go ahead and save it. And save it with your church name. And I think everybody can see it, like all the admins can see it once you save your shape on there. And then, sorry, hold on. Let's see. Okay. So go ahead and I am gonna pull up because I did save the shape. So if you save it, it'll be under saved shapes. And then Good Shepherd, draw. So Terilyn and I, this is what we decided to draw on ours. And so we got kind of went down there, went up here. And now's where, so this is the spot, welcome to the rabbit hole. So that's the easy stuff, sort of easy. I mean, it gets us down to who's our neighbor. But once we're really, really clear who we're looking at, why we're looking at them, these are the people that we want to interact with, that we want to know, that we want to understand, that we want to learn. Now it gets really interesting. So you can go down to demographics. There is so much here. You can go to like thematic and open this section, this here, and it will open up. You can look at demographic trends, voting age, phase of life, families in poverty. You can look up what they do for work, housing, diversity. So I'm going to go ahead and pull diversity I think I'm going to pull diversity for them. So racial, ethnic trends, detail. We can do all sorts of different people in here and pull up reports there. So then I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to do this one. So an overview, one of my favorite ones to pull is primary mosaic type. Primary mosaic type gives you a general overview that is helpful to see who's living in what neighborhood, or it's not going to pull it up. I don't know where I went. Hold on. An error has occurred. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. But anyway, it's a map you can use. So overview, you can do mosaics. You can pick like I said, rabbit hole. There's just so much here that you can look at. I'm going to pull these off really quick.
And Tiffany, for those of you that joined us when we have Tom Bandy on, and he spoke of all those different groups, those are the mosaic groups, and they're groups. They're defined culturally, economically, and there's a whole bunch of them to sort of give you a sense of a story of a group of people in your neighborhoods. So to connect back to a previous conversation we had, when he talked about, the different groups, those are the mosaic types that you can get from Mission Insight.
It is not letting me create this. I wish I could pull it up, Jeff, because then I could talk about it more, but it's just not letting me. And I'm not sure exactly why. It's not that surprising, but oh well. I'll show you some mosaic groups from them here in a second. Okay, go away. Okay, so predefined groups. So I can go to predefined reports. I can go to a study area, which is the Good Shepherd. This is the area that I have written. I can do quick insight, executive insight, full insight, comparative insight. I'm going to pull religious insight. And so kind of what I'm showing you right now is the rabbit hole. I'm going to take you down more of a specific trail here in a second. Don't get too lost, because in reality, a lot of these details are interesting, but they're not useful. Especially, I mean, they're useful if you're really digging deep into demographics, but not right now and not in the beginning. Here's one of the reports that I'm going to pull up. I'm just going to kind of go, I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but talking about reports in general, I mean, this is only one of there was 7 just on that one page that we could pull up. This one specifically is talking about the religious preferences of the people that live in the neighborhood. If I remember, it's 30 pages long. It will tell you everything about, God is love and invites the world into a loving relationship. Hey, looking at this, you can spend hours on this one report. And this was just one of many. They're all really, really long. They're interesting, but I want to take you through what's useful before, so don't get lost in that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Mission Insight. I just wanted to show you just kind of a general, here's what the reports kind of are, what they look like. But this is the one, the Build Demographics report is the one that's probably the one that I find most helpful, is to go into Overview here, go down to Mosaic, which will show up here, and then click Generate Report. And it tells you down in the bottom right that it's building the report. Sometimes they take a little while. So then we're going to get into, I have to find it. I think it's this one. So the mosaics. This is where they take everybody, the stuff Tom Bandy was talking about, when you take everybody and you divide them into groups and you tell the story about them. There is, a lot of groups. There is a lot of, we all fall into at least one of these. I think every individual falls into one group. So they put them in these groups, and then they tell the story about them and what they do and why they do it. It talks about, the religious preferences and backgrounds. And so for Good Shepherd, I'm just going to go through the first one. You can see that there are 3 kind of main ones in their neighborhood, and then it drops kind of quickly until you only have one of these, one blue sky boomer, which is baby boomer, one young city solo all by themselves, but quite a few middle class, melting pot, everyday moderates. So we decided when I was working with Good Shepherd, let's go in here and see who are these people. So once you know who your people are and who your groups are, sorry, I'm reading I'm reading the comments, so hold on. Oh, I have no idea about the disabilities thing. I'm sure it would not surprise me if they knew who was living with disabilities and where, but I don't know how to find it. I would look in the demographics report if I was going to look for that specific question. So we decided it was H28. So now I'm going to go down to help. I have no idea why it's creating a theme map now. Again, this is another space where you can just totally get lost in the weeds down here, because you have the mosaic references. So the groups, the USA groups, USA e-handbook by Experian. This one's also by Experian. The one by Bandy is the one that we're going to look at, and the one that I find the most useful. And this is the one that I bring to lay leadership. When I am working with a church, I print out the top 1, 2, sometimes 3 mosaic groups, and I bring it in. And my question to lay leadership, to lead church leadership, is how are these people described in this document? How are they the same, and how are they different than how are they the same and how are they different than the people in your church? So once we got here with Good Shepherd, I asked them as a church, okay, tell me how this is like you. How is this not like you? What's the same? What let's tell this story. It's kind of like a Venn diagram where you draw the two circles and you have the church and you have the neighborhood. Where do they meet? Where are they going to come together? And this one was their church matched them very well. Middle of the road, they avoid extremes. They do, it's funny, they do blend worship. So that was something really like, so when they started reading this, they started, this is actually very, very much like us. So if you get a little bit further down, leadership preferences. So they want somebody that cares for them, an enabler. They don't need somebody that's visionary, that's going to take them out to do the extremes. They do want somebody maybe a little bit more that's a CEO leader person. Pastors emphasize the church as a family or a community. What we ended up discovering in here as we went, I just stopped for just a second. Here, there is your words or questions for you to maybe not you as individuals, but your church or whoever to really dig in and look. Who are you? Who's your neighbor? Are they the same? So the guiding questions are really helpful. We found. So what do they want for hospitality preferences, worship preferences, and a description of what that looks like. And then education preferences. What do they want to learn? And again, I would point out that this is not, let's read the demographics and get rid of what matters to the church and just do what the neighborhood wants. I think it's finding that space where who your church already is matches who the neighborhood is. So in this specific case, when we were going through these at the education preferences and when we were looking at the demographics, what we discovered was that their neighborhood is full of families, full of them. And that's why when they did a trunk or treat in October, they had 250 people show up. Because really, this is a space where where who they are matches extremely well who their neighbor was, and especially in that one event. So one of our questions is, how then do we take something that they're struggling with? So they're struggling with getting a good children's program going, but we know the kids are there. So the question then starts becoming, how is it that we can start a new program here that fits them, their church, and works for them and with them? And especially there's this line at the very beginning of this where it says so the people in their neighborhood like neighborhood churches. So they're not going to go to a big First Colorado Springs that's huge and nobody knows them. They want the neighborhood churches. They want them located on quiet side streets and average about 200 to 300 people in worship. Churches where the majority of members belong to this segment often grow or shrink to that size. Right now, Good Shepherd is smaller than that. So there's these moments in here that we're looking, and it's so clear that this is where their opportunity is, because that's what the neighbors want. That's what is there already. And then like when we started, so I've turned it off, but if you go into even more of those reports, they have about 65% of the neighborhood around them is non-white. So their neighborhood itself is so diverse, so many families, so many kids. How is it that they make choices based on that information, on who their neighbors are, in a way that absolutely, fits them and who they are? Okay. So I think that's what I have. And I know there's a lot there. And I know, like, if you're going to do some of this, you're going to have to go back and follow the clicks. Are there questions? Are there pieces that you want me to go back and dig a little bit deeper into or look at in a different way?
Can I add a comment?
Yes. Yep.
You did an excellent job. I've worked with this for several years, and it's so hard to stay out of the weeds. But after the Tom Bandy talk, I've continued to talk to my leaders about this humongous cultural gap. And there's so many more cultural divisions. And this is the answer that we have as a question. Who are they? You know, I know one Hispanic, but you told me there was a lot in my neighborhood. Who are they? You know, that's just one demographic example. It could be elderly, Asian, financial, whatever. So thank you. And I wouldn't be surprised if we might want some follow-up conversations to, let's go see what we can find. And then can we come back and mull this over some more, just because it's so important and so deep.
Clearly, I love logging into MissionInsite. I love this part of digging in and figuring out who your people are. So if you want help, if you're like, hey, we're ready to, look at a different way, I'm absolutely willing to come, ask some of the questions, because, there's more questions than answers in MissionInsite, but you can ask all the questions.
And I think that's a key, is who, bringing a few questions to MissionInsite first might be helpful, because then it is not this ocean of information for you. Like if you ask, where are the kids, right? Then you can go look at, data on demographics for children, and you can learn, oh, well, the kids aren't here, or maybe they are here, right? Or what neighborhood are they in if you're looking at canvassing a neighborhood or starting a program, right? There's all sorts of things you can find here. One of the things I'm working on with the church right now is finances, right? What's your capability? What's your giving capability as a church in this moment and growth? You can find that information through the Comparative Insight report if you've uploaded your people.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I did 3 things and lost my train of thought totally. Lost it. It's gone. I was going to say something. I was totally agreeing with you and adding an and.
Tiffany, have you used it in Utah? There's a couple of us that are Utah pastors, and the demographics of religion and things might be really different.
Yeah, I have not used it in Utah. I'm almost exclusively Front Range, so Pikes Peak, where I've used it. I would tell you, so I'm taking a little bit of a side jaunt here for a second. After doing enough demographics here in Colorado Springs specifically, I've done it with enough small churches that I can tell you the future of the United Methodist Church in this city is us trying to figure out how to work together as one unit and going in one direction instead of fighting each other for the small demographic pie that we think we have to fight for. So when you say Utah, my question instantly goes to, like, if we started doing the data in multiple churches in Utah, how could we find that path that helps everybody move forward together and making each other stronger? I have not done work in Utah, but that would be really intriguing because it's
yeah. Thank you. That is exciting.
Yeah.
Tiffany, my question is about if you come to a church that's already used MissionInsite, and they had a login, but you don't know how to get in, do you reset the data? What do you do about that?
I think I would talk to Dawn Lemons, and she'll get you in, and she can work directly with me. MissionInsite as a company is phenomenal. Like, they are so helpful. Like, any question I've ever had, they've been on within minutes. So I think Dawn is our connection, and Dawn connects to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Reach out to me, and I'd be happy to help you with login or answer those beginning questions to get you started.
Thanks, Dawn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you can have, I think you can get your own personal login to even, I think you can see your church that you're associated with if you're not the one that originally put the data in. I think.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. They're individual logins, but then your login is associated with your church.
Okay, that's great. I have 2 churches too, so it'll be helpful for me to talk to Don and figure that out. Thank you.
Right. We'll be happy to help. Other questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
we can.
I was wondering, when you're loading in the data from, for your membership, I've done it a couple times, but I always update it because it's not, I mean, like what I was looking at says we have like 900 members. Well, I know we don't have 900 members right now. So should I be going through it and kind of updating it before I load it in, or does it matter?
You know, I emailed MissionInsite once. I put in data for First Methodist when I started the Edge in 2014. And I went back to put data in last year, and I asked them that, what I think was the same question, you know, do I need to erase the data? And she said, just upload and it will like replace it. So I guess I would say it. So are you saying, so every time you've updated the information, it's grown to 900 people?
No, it's gotten less, unfortunately. And so I've updated it to make the information more current to what our church position is right now.
Okay. So my use of the information, I don't know that I would find that overly helpful.
Okay.
Update it. So I literally didn't update it for 7 years, and we're a big church with a lot of movement because I'm just using it for that heat map part. Where are the main clusters of our people? But that hasn't changed. I mean, that doesn't change with one person coming or going.
Right.
So I would not update it often, although if you start using the data more specifically, Brian Lee is the one that really goes into like house by house detail.
Uh-huh.
Update it.
Okay.
And it in some sense depends on the question you're asking.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Right.
like if you're asking a financial question, it helps to have the list updated and
Right.
keep your membership up to date, because it's mapping where your people are with the kind of the economic status of that
Yeah.
neighborhood, and it'll give you an estimate on
Exactly.
you know where you are. And it's enlightening to churches to see what the capacity is
Right.
of, you
Okay.
know, of their church. So
Right.
yeah.
That's a really interesting question.
Thank you.
Tom Bandy. So when I was planting the Edge, Paul Nixon had us do an activity where we wrote down stuff, and I ended up on the phone with Tom Bandy for an hour. It was amazing. But he sat down with me and he's like, okay, here's your baby boomers, here's your young adults. And by the way, your baby boomers are not going to come to the Edge. They're not going to be interested in it. They have church, but look how they live in the same neighborhood with each other. So because I think it was R66 and one other one live in the same neighborhood, the baby boomers that live next to the young adults are going to actually financially support your new church start, even if they're not going to come to it. So this is where Jeff's talking about, what question are you asking? You know, I mean, to go, my baby boomers that live by my young adults are going to be supportive. And he was absolutely right on. You can just go down this rabbit hole forever, but it's asking questions and knowing, you know, kind of what you're looking for, I guess.
Right. Thank you.
Other questions, comments, uses of this? What's your biggest question? What I mean, you came to this to learn about Mission Insight. What's the biggest question you have about your church right now? Type it into the chat or unmute yourself and share. Let's see.
Can I take a step back from
Sure.
that?
Yeah, please.
Um,
Go right ahead.
And this is definitely a stupid question, but how do you know, like I'm hearing a lot of ask the right, or like what questions are you asking? So how do I know what questions I should be asking?
Yeah. I'll answer that really quick. I know Jeff probably has a different answer than me. For me, my question is, I want to dig down first into who is my neighbor. I want that small enough section that I can resource marketing. I want to dig down to that small space. Who is that space, that shape? I'm not going to draw a circle around, a little neighborhood in Kansas and say those are the people I'm going to, be working with. That's always my first question when I work with a church is who is the neighbors that we're going to work with? And it sounds like a really simple question, but for me, that ends up being hard. A Good Shepherd was easy, right? Because their neighborhood was so clear. I think People's United Methodist Church is harder because their neighborhood is south of where we are versus where they are. Now, that being said, Cowboy Church, I have a different question because I'm starting a worshiping congregation with the intention of going after a very specific demographic group. So I'm going after women, very specifically women that are kind of along the lines of Brene Brown and vulnerability and courage. That's who I want to build around me. So that question would be, where do they live versus who's my neighbor? Jeff?
Rebecca, that's absolutely right, Tiffany. Rebecca, I think you start with, in some sense, the mosaic groups. You plot out, and depending on what kind of community. For a lot of us, we're in small communities where a circle around the town works just fine because it's so small. And then see what are the top 2 mosaic groups and just read the reports on them. And I think some other questions will come. I think the question Tiffany asked is probably the best one, which is, are these people my people? I mean, are these the people I see in my church, or are they different? And if they're different, why? Why are they not in my church, right? So for that sense, see where just, it's helpful. The mosaic groups are helpful just to get a picture of your community. And you'll find out that there's things you didn't know about your community, because all of us, including our congregations, often look at our community through the lens of our church. We don't look at the community directly. We look at it through the lens of our church. And this gives you a chance of looking at that directly, right? So like some of the questions, who is our neighbor and who are we, right? We've talked about that. Who are the Hispanic speaking neighbors? You're able to see where the highest population of Hispanic speakers are through the theme maps. You can plot that out and see where the highest percentage are, right? Jared says, I like to paint a picture using people plot to demonstrate that church status quo will not continue unless we bring in new people, right? Especially if the neighborhood looks different than the church, or your region looks different than your church. How do I bring in the 40 to 60-year-olds? Kelly, that's a great question. Here's one of the things that the mosaic groups teach us is there's different groups of 40 to 60-year-olds. It's not just about age, it's also about culture, economic status, personal history. So look at who are the mosaic groups of the 40 to 60-year-olds in your community, and maybe you'll get a few hints about what they need, what they're looking for, right?
And I would point to, what is that, Highlands, where Brad Larvick is? He's done a phenomenal job of figuring out who his neighbor is and really figuring out who his church is and matching those really, really well. So if you really dig into this data and you're like, here's our neighbor and here's us, and maybe they're not the same, you and the neighbor, but Brad really, I think, did a good job of figuring out who that was and being a neighborhood church. right? That's who they are, very intentionally with everything they do. We are a neighborhood church. We know who our neighbors are, and we are going to meet them. You know, I mean, that's
He
kind
also, as a pastor, happens to meet his demographic exactly. So that's the other thing that I would just say, like when it says what the pastor needs to be or what they like in a pastor, I think it's helpful to see those and sometimes they match and sometimes they don't. So it's just good to know that, like, just because you know these things, it doesn't mean that everything will take off perfectly. Like
Right.
Kylan, as an example.
I would say that I don't know that there's a lot of total mismatches as much as maybe finding your strengths and where they meet. But I don't think like you're right. They're not going to totally overlap really well like Brad's in his neighborhood did in his church. But I think generally there's usually some overlap somewhere that you can find that common ground.
And Jeff Rainwater stump speech, okay? We are missionaries. Look at the list, see where, first look for the places where you do overlap, where your skills, your general demographic meets with the demographic and the leadership style of the people around you. But then look at where you have to be a missionary. Mm-hmm. Look at where I have to change my practices. I have to change how I lead to meet this group. We can, many of us, well, I can't. Many of us should or can speak multiple languages. We can also lead from multiple places in leadership style, and we should. And it should be based on the needs of our community. Like Lynn says, who are we missing as our neighbor? How do we focus for greater impact and to build community? And I think if you're looking for the first report to look at, and you can upload your data, look at the comparative insight. That is the first report that I think lists the differences and the similarities between your church and your community.
Hey, Jeff, one more thing too, along with Lynn. This is Cherie in Utah also, and so is Rebecca. So we probably already know that we may not be neighborhood churches because there's not that many Protestant or Methodist churches. And so people will drive over an hour and a half just to go to one of the Methodist churches. So Lynn brought up, which is excellent with our circuit, like this could be a way for us as, two different circuits in the Salt Lake City Valley to know, because we already know our neighbors aren't coming. Like, I'm amazed that I don't have people that live in my neighborhood, but that could be then a place for mission work and that different leadership style too, if they are not connected with the LDS church. I mean, I'm really curious and excited and scared all at the same time, which is probably a good thing. So I'm really glad you guys had this meeting.
Yeah, Cherie, and I think for you, and anybody in Utah, and you're looking to mosaic groups, most of us can look at the top 3. You're going to have to look at your list and go, that's Mormon, that's Mormon, that's Mormon. Okay, 4, 5, 6. Right. Those are ours, right? These are our groups. And then say, realize that while they may not be the top in your area, there's plenty of folks there that fit who you need to be.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.
Any final questions? Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us this week and sharing with Mission Insight. And as friends, as you've heard, she's willing to answer questions. So, drop a line to her if you would like. If you need help connecting with Mission Insight, please do connect with Don Lemons, who is our administrator of this system. A plug, this is a free resource to you because of your mission shares. And because of your support of the conference, we can support you with this resource. So use it well, use it often. And if you have questions, talk to Don, talk to Tiffany. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be able to help you any way I can. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Tiffany, very much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. This is cool.
So in 2 weeks, we are going to shift gears vitality looks different in many different ways, and we're going to be inviting Dr. Paul Bretz, who's going to share with us a training on QPR, which is a very simple but effective way for laity and clergy to be trained in suicide prevention and intervention through some very simple, straightforward steps. And I hope he will also share a bit about how not only you can learn about QPR, but you can also maybe bring it to your church and implement it within your church. So we look forward to that conversation in 2 weeks. And then starting September 16th, we are going to move back to weekly Vital Conversations as we're going to expand the host list of what we're going to do. And we're going to have Annie Arnoldy, Betty Wynn, and Janet Mulroy all on staff come in the off weeks to share guest presenters in their own fields and expand the idea of what Vital Conversations will be. So thank you all for being here. It is a joy to be in ministry with you. Now go in peace, and as you go, may God go before you to show you the way. May God be above you to protect you, beneath you to hold you up, beside you to be your friend, and inside of you to give you peace. Amen.